In today's video, we'll learn about a very interesting result that emerged from the paper Toolformer Language Model Can Teach Themselves to Use Tools by the Meta AI Research Lab. This was published in early 2023. The result I'm going to be talking here is not the main result of the paper, but is the one that captured my attention the most. By the way, the paper is available on archive in the description. You can check it out afterward. So the main result is that large language model ability to learn how to learn to use tool emerge at around 775 million parameters. The distinction here is pretty important. The way the training was done is that they were teaching LLMs how to themselves learn how to use new tools. So they're effectively learning how to learn new tools. The LLM recognizes during a new task which tool to use and how, and it's this capacity to self-learn these tools and when to use them that is emerging at this particular size and not before. I think they used two other models, one at 124 million parameters and another one at 300 something. So the tool in question that we're talking about here, there's a QA tool in this example that they're using. There's a calculator tool. There's a wiki tool where the model could query like a bunch of facts, as in the example in orange, and also a translator tool where they could figure out the meaning of a word and directly have it. The interesting part with the translator tool is that it's actually another neural network that the neural network they were training learn how to use. Basically, all of these tools are wrapped around an API which they can use. So in this video, I don't want to dive into the full paper. I think it will be too long of a tutorial for that. What I want to do is just to dive into these results. We go straight into them and we're going to take a look at all of the graph. After that, we're going to check out the methodology on how they actually train the model to use the tool and whatnot. But we'll spend a lot of time on the result. So let's start with the result. So there are three main subgraphs of interest for this specific result. We will look at them one by one. First, let's just take a look at the graph structure to orient ourselves a bit. So there's 5 different models that were tested in terms of size. And all of these models are compared against GPT-3, which is the dotted line performance. So each model you see is a point on this curve. On the y-axis, you have the performance on the different benchmark, and all of the numbers means different thing depending on the benchmark. On the x-axis, you're going to have the model size in millions of parameters. And so you have 3 lines in there. You have the dotted line, which is the GPT-3 result. You have the orange line, which is each model baseline without any ability to learn tool. This ability is called Toolformer. And then there's the blue line, which is these models that we're talking about with their size, but with this ability to learn new tools. So the first benchmark we're talking about is LAMA. And LAMA benchmark is a set of tasks where the model need to complete a statement, let's say in this particular phrase, that was masked. And it's a type of a benchmark that was devised to probe the knowledge of a language model. So in this case, the sentence is like, to emphasize the 15th anniversary of the Super Bowl, the masked color was used. And what the model need to be able to say is gold. So if we look at in the result for the figure 4, the 2 smallest model here, the performance in LAMA, when they have their Toolformer ability disabled or not, it's around the same thing. They get around the same performance. So what does this effectively mean is that the new ability, the Toolformer ability, is absolutely useless to improve performance. However, right, as soon as the model hit the 775 parameters, the difference between when they can and they cannot use the Toolformer ability is vastly superior. It's a big difference here, and it just continue throughout, and then at the end completely In the 1.6 billion parameter model, it outperformed GPT-3, which is like orders of magnitude bigger. So if we look at the math benchmark, a similar kind of story is sketched out, and then you can see that there's a same difference at 775. The result here with the math stuff is interesting because large language model are usually like very poor at math, especially like the GPT-3 and below. Any model with a small enough capacity that was trained on language doesn't quite get math as we think it should be getting it. So they don't understand all the intricacy of the operator and the numbers, and it makes sense. It does make sense when you actually allow the large language model to use a tool like a calculator, which will be very useful to do math stuff. They're like able to overcome really easily their limitation as long as they're greater than 775 million parameters. Before that, they're kind of poor. But after this point, even a model like smaller than the 1.6 billion one is kind of as good as GPT-3, which is 100 and something billion parameters. So the gain in performance is huge, and relative to when they cannot use tools, it's a lot. It's a lot of difference. So that was for the first two benchmark. There's an interesting thing that happens in the third benchmark, and this one is very different than the others, and it does add a really interesting nuance here to the whole experiment. So as you can see here, all models, like the five that they've checked, are improving now with their newfound tool former ability. So what does it mean here if during the Q benchmark all models are improving, even the one that are below 775 million parameters? It's kind of a bit weird that before that the small capacity model can't figure out how to use a tool, and now it seems like in this particular case the two smaller model can. So let's look at the main tool used during the QA type of task, because it's not the same one as the math one. It's not the same one as the LAMA benchmark. As we can see here in the blue section, the interface for the tool is actually pretty simple. It's just asking like what, who, why, where type of question, followed by the term the model need to complete. So this actually makes this API, this tool that they're using, very simple compared to the other interface, which require a bit more general understanding about how they work. So if you can see here, Joe Biden was born in, and then the actual question that is sent out is, where was Joe Biden born? This is how they use the API for that particular QA tool. And it's the same thing like throughout. It doesn't require like a complex understanding of the input output of the tool. So what the authors in this paper realize is that there seems to be a very tight connection here between the complexity of the tool required to complete a given task and the capacity of the model. So if the model is if the tool is really complex, a small model will not be able to learn to use the tool and when to use the tool. Well, if the actual tool is simple, a model with a smaller capacity will still be able to leverage it properly. So since the model aren't explicitly taught when to use what tool, the model need to have enough internal capacity to figure out which tool to use and how to use it. Because remember, in all of these examples, the tool former is not only trained on one tool, he's shown all the tools. So it seems like the smallest model kind of know that when they're in trouble, they can just use the QA tool effectively. So the cool thing about this result is that it seems to mirror the fact that brain with low capacity don't really use tools, and those with higher capacity actually do. It's a bit more nuanced than that. Like small brain with lower capacity can actually use some tool, but they're very simple. And then as you get more and more complicated brains, you get animals that they can actually use very complicated set of tool and actually build their own tool. So it's kind of similar in the sense that the brain with high capacity, like human brains, can figure out when and where to use the right tool for the job. even though they've been shown just a few times how to use it, and they don't have to be explicitly trained for all type of task. So all in all, I think it's just a pretty cool result. Don't look too much into the neuroscience stuff here. Basically, without going to the full paper, let's check out how the authors arrived at the result and how they actually did that tool former ability. So for the method, there's like about five point. So first, uh, when as pointed by the author, they were trying to teach the model how to learn how to use like literally any tool. So what we mean by tools is those wrapped in APIs, like the question answer one, calculator, Wikipedia search, translation system, a calendar. That's kind of the main tools that they've been using. What they did to teach the large language model is that they've created a few examples of how to use the API, and those were shown to the large language model in the process that is called in context learning. So then the authors used in context learning to create like a huge data set of example on how to use the API calls. So basically, did a bit of a data augmentation. This part of the methodology is like the most fascinating from the study. There are various steps they're using in order to make in context learning work for this particular example. Like they execute the file, the filter, and whatnot. But basically, what they did is that they showed a few examples to the large language module, kind of understood. They asked it to generate way more of these API calls as shown in the example. So it augment, make a huge data set. They actually execute the API calls. They filter out those that are kind of useless. And then they use that new data set that is created in order to fine tune the models so that they can do something. So this part, the just a slight tangent here, the in context learning part is absolutely mind blowing. I've linked into the description a blog post from the Stanford AI blog that goes a bit in depth into that emergent ability of a large language model. Should definitely check it out. It's pretty interesting. Like I said, the model were fed back their own data that they created, right, to fine tune themselves, and then they were able to call the API call. And this whole methodology of like how the input output is done is pretty simple. It's like they tag the part where they want to do an API call, and then once the output is done, there's a sub process that will actually do the API call, and then they will replace it at the right spot, and then this will be the answer that it will send out. At inference, the model kind of there's a finalized step, but the model kind of figure out which tool to use, and then put it into the prompt, the output, and then do it and bring it back. The only thing here is that it was only limited to one API call per a query. Basically, you cannot chain a bunch of API calls. So some of the output were garbage, right? So here, blah blah. After and then they use a calendar today, Saturday, blah blah. Disneyland fiasco. It's just garbage. It doesn't mean anything. It didn't understand properly what was asked. And if you look at this one at the top, enjoy this picture from and then they use the calendar. Today's blah blah blah. Easter egg hunt, and then it actually was good in this particular case. By creating a lot of these and then filtering out, it's better able to know when to use them, and then when it actually is time to do the test stuff, they're more likely to the large language model that were trained are more likely to know when to use the tool. And like I said, the smaller models kind of are super confused. They don't know when to use them, and the bigger model actually are a bit better to do that motion and know exactly when. Well, not exactly. They know better which model to use, which tool to use, when to use it, in which section of the output they should be using it, and which parameter they should be using for that thing. That's the result. I found it absolutely fascinating. If you want to check it more, I encourage you to check out the full paper. It's not the long one, and it's pretty readable. So just to recap here, the author taught GPT-G. So this is like one subversion of GPT that is open source. How to use the model and when and which model to use. The model were able to leverage their knowledge to perform various benchmark tasks. But the actual thing that is interesting here for me is that at about 775 million parameters and above, the model actually were able to do something with that new skill set that they've learned. Before that, they don't have the capacity. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any question, don't hesitate to write me a comment or a DM, and have a great week.